Mari, we can see there the cars pulling up and no doubt expecting to see President Zelensky imminently.
Ceasefire, Mr. President. What's your message to President Trump? Will the UK put boots on the ground to secure a ceasefire? Will you call out President Trump if he falls to Putin?
Right now, all eyes are on.
Is President Trump listening to you, Prime Minister? Is he listening to you, Mr. President?
Ultimately, everyone is
Will you reject land loss, Mr. President?
Trump, Vladimir Putin.
Will you accept the frozen conflict, Prime Minister? Will you back Ukraine fully?
And Mari, it's hard to have imagined a warmer greeting and embrace there than we just saw.
Yeah, absolutely. A very warm greeting there between Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Zelensky. Slightly behind schedule, but nonetheless, we know that the two leaders have a good relationship. We know that Zelensky is incredibly grateful when it comes to the UK's unrelenting support for Ukraine and for the country's sovereignty. And clearly there, it was difficult because it was a very warm embrace, but nonetheless very, very kind of serious, stoic expressions on their face because they understand just how high the stakes are in the next 48 hours. And clearly Ukraine, as we've known it, of course, is, at a crossroads, perhaps, depending on how seriously we can take tomorrow's summit and what comes out of it. And Zelensky knows that, and Starmer knows that too.
Well, Mari, we are going to come back later on in the programme, and of course, any readouts, any news of the details of the conversation, we'll be back there immediately. But for now, we'll leave Downing Street. Of course, there are those pictures there of the arrival from President Zelensky moments ago.
And you saw those images there. I mean, that big hug between the two leaders, I think, is symbolic of not just their relationship as two men, but also the relationship between the UK and Ukraine. There has been unwavering support from the UK to Ukraine through different iterations of governments under Boris Johnson, under Liz Truss, under Rishi Sunak, now under Keir Starmer. That is one of the only things, I think, that has remained incredibly consistent, and obviously for good reason. And so now those two leaders being able to really frankly speak to each other about what might be about to happen tomorrow. We know Donald Trump has talked about the possibility of Zelensky being involved in a second meeting with Putin, depending on whether he thinks that's appropriate. Of course, that will also depend on whether Zelensky thinks that Russia is being serious, and obviously he has already laid out some of his red lines when it comes to what he will not do in a peace negotiation. So to an extent, Keir Starmer is in a position now where he needs to remain in solidarity with Zelensky, but nonetheless understand the US's position and the US's appetite to get a deal, even if it might not be a perfect deal.
Europeans appear to be cautiously optimistic about the message they received from President Trump. They were saying that apparently he'd said his goal for the summit tomorrow was to obtain a ceasefire between Moscow and Kyiv. Some suggestions that he also agreed that any territorial issues had to be decided with Volodymyr Zelensky's involvement, and that security guarantees had to be part of that deal. Do you feel that that's encouraging? Are you encouraged by that?
I think we're very intimidated by all of this. So there is no encouragement at all. But what we need ceasefire, and we need progress in having long-term peace. That's very complicated because we want justice. And at this stage, of course, Russia will never accept this. But I think with the amount of work we do with all diplomacy and support that we have together with our European partners, our voice is much stronger, and we demand justice. justice, which means that those who started the war have to be war criminals, and they have to be in the court, they have to be in the tribunal. And justice also will mean a lot of things, including paying reparations, frozen assets that should be used for Ukraine recovery, and many more. But at this stage, we are very far from that point.
And we've just seen pictures of Volodymyr Zelenskyy arriving at Downing Street and being greeted warmly by the Prime Minister here with a shake of the hand and an embrace. How important is that show of support by countries like the UK for Ukraine?
Very important, because there is a long process of how coalition of like-minded countries was getting stronger and stronger. We remember very, very early that not every European country was ready to support us militarily or economically. Now there is one voice, and yes, there are problems with some countries, but in general, Europe is much stronger, and the UK played one of the key roles, and we're very grateful to that. And I think every average Ukrainian knows this.
And Europe has been keen that Ukraine's voice is heard in these discussions. It's something that Keir Starmer has talked about often. Are you confident that it will be?
There is no other way. We need to make sure that the voice will be heard. I'm not saying that everything is optimistic, because I'm sure that we will be forced to accept certain positions that will be agreed between Trump or Putin. But we have our rights not to agree to that and to demand to something that is important to us. But in the same time, we should use this momentum of these negotiations very wisely. So we cannot reject everything. We should demand a ceasefire, but with all other very hard questions, we need to have a plan. How do we discuss this? And hopefully it will be made. But I'm not very optimistic about all of this.
I mean, while the world's attention is on the diplomacy and this big meeting in Alaska tomorrow, the war continues, doesn't it? Give us a sense of what's happening there on the ground.
So Russia is very active in attacking Ukrainian cities, civilians, and also infrastructure and military bases in the recent 2 weeks. Surprisingly, Russia doesn't attack Kyiv in the last 10 days, and I'm now in Kyiv, and I can tell you that it feels very strange when 10 days there was no attacks. It feels that something is wrong, and that's very suspicious. But just before the interview with you, I was in the shop, and one lady who brought me something that I was buying, she burst into the tears saying, "I'm very sorry, but my son just called me. He's at the front line. I don't know whether I will see him in the future, because things are very, very bad, and people are dying, these soldiers." So that's very heartbreaking.
Yeah, a reminder of just how serious things are. Well, Lisa Yasko, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your reaction to the diplomacy this week. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Has today's visit been a success, Prime Minister? Do you have a plan B if Trump fails in Alaska? Will UK troops be sent to Ukraine to secure a ceasefire? Yes or no? Will Ukraine be sending more weapons? Will UK be sending more weapons to Ukraine?
Tomorrow between President Putin and President Trump. So an embrace from Keir Starmer, another show of support for the Ukrainian leader after those talks in Downing Street. And today's meeting follows on, of course, from the virtual meeting yesterday of European leaders who again met to discuss how Ukraine's voice could be heard at this meeting between Putin and Trump, and the hope that Ukraine's needs will be recognised there. Anyway, plenty more analysis of that Downing Street meeting a little bit later. Hello, very good morning. Thanks for joining us here today. In the last few minutes, the Ukrainian president has left Downing Street, where he spoke to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. The pair met ahead of tomorrow's meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska, which the Ukrainian president wasn't invited to. Well, our political correspondent, Mari Aurora, is in Downing Street for us. And Mari, just how important is this meeting and the show of warmth and affection between the two leaders as well?
Yeah, it is important, and it's important for perhaps a different reason from tomorrow's summit. No decisions are going to be made today, potentially anything consequential when it comes to a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. But why it's important is, first of all, the two leaders being able to meet face-to-face rather than on a Zoom link and really connect, discuss possibilities of what might come out of tomorrow's summit and therefore possible reactions and essentially planning ahead so that they feel prepared and rather than blindsided by potentially all the different eventualities. But also it's a symbol of solidarity between the two nations. It's a symbol of friendship between the two nations as well as the two men. And also, I'm sure they will have discussed the level of effort that has gone in from the European side, obviously the Ukrainian side as well, to try and make sure that Trump and the US administration come across to their way of thinking, understand what red lines are and why they feel it is so essential for President Trump to understand some of those existential red lines as far as Ukraine is concerned. So actually these meetings, even though they look like a bit of a photo op, they are incredibly important. I mean, it ran over a schedule. It was well over an hour in the end, and clearly that means they had a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about, a lot to hash out. And so I think not just the connection between the two nations and the two men, but actually I think some of the preparations that will inevitably be going on behind closed doors to make sure that whatever comes out of tomorrow's meeting, whether that be potentially a second meeting with Zelenskyy involved this time around or not, that Europe is all on the same page, and therefore that gives them a stronger position and a strength in numbers to an extent when it comes to trying to push Putin into agreeing a ceasefire that they feel comfortable with.
OK, Mari, really interesting to see that statement when it comes out, the readout from that meeting. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. Well, our US correspondent Martha Kellner is in Alaska and has the latest now from Anchorage, where that meeting is due to take place tomorrow.
This is Alaska's largest, most populous city. The actual meeting will take place a few miles from where I am now, at a military base on the outskirts of Anchorage. There is one key reason for that, and that's because this meeting was put together so late in the day, so haphazardly, that there really wasn't many other venues that were an option in terms of the security apparatus that has to surround these two leaders. Of course, being a military base, it has inbuilt security. So that's the reason that it's taking place there. European leaders uniting around Ukraine, around President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy saying yesterday that he had received assurances from President Trump about what would, or rather what wouldn't be discussed at this summit with Vladimir Putin. Apparently he's assured Zelenskyy that there won't be any discussion of land territory swapping, despite indicating to the contrary earlier this week. He's also assured him that Ukraine will have a key role in any future meetings. He says he wants to set up a meeting with Zelenskyy very quickly in the wake of this meeting, should it go OK, in his words. But really, I think there is a sense here, as with most things that concern Donald Trump, that anything could well happen. And people in Anchorage divided about whether this meeting should be going ahead at all, particularly without Zelenskyy in the room. I was speaking earlier on today to a woman, an older lady who had a Ukrainian flag in her front garden, and she'd actually only bought that flag in February in the wake of watching on TV that meeting between Donald Trump and Zelenskyy in the Oval Office, where Zelenskyy was humiliated for not wearing a suit when Donald Trump told him he didn't hold the cards when it came to arranging a ceasefire in Ukraine. So she brought that flag in support of Ukraine. She says she is horrified and appalled that Zelenskyy won't be in the room. But then I spoke to a couple of fishermen a short while ago, and they said that they think that Donald Trump is the king deal maker, that he holds the cards to finding lasting peace in Ukraine. Of course, for Donald Trump, he will have that image in his mind of him shaking hands with another strongman leader tomorrow in Vladimir Putin on US soil. That will be a calling card to his vanity. He loves being the centre of attention. He loves those big moments. Whether he can actually find a breakthrough with Putin is an entirely different question.
Martha Kellner there. Well, just to let you know that at 6 p.m. tonight, we're going to be live in the Oval Office where President Trump is going to be giving an update ahead of those talks. And then later on at 9 o'clock, Mark Austin is going to host a special edition of the World programme live from Alaska with more of what you need to know ahead of that Trump-Putin summit.